are so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horse is kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight. Welcome to Burnin' Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Brought to you by Stetson Ranches out of Fromberg, Montana.
Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Happy Friday. Hope the week's treated you all right. Meant to do a bull session this week. Rural internet strikes once again. Sometimes these episodes just ain't meant to be, so I gotta reach down into the vault, do a little research, and throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks, huh? Anyhow, I think you'll like this episode. It's a pretty good one, and yeah, let's get into it.
Burning daylight, burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Burning daylight.
You guys, I know most everybody that listens to this show has seen Lonesome Dove numerous times, myself included. I can't count the number of times I've watched it. I've read the book 3-4 times, and it's just a great story. But there's always there's that spot when Gus goes to find Lori, and they hole up at a place called Adobe Walls there on the Llano Estacado, or the Staked Plains. They're in the panhandle of Texas, which if you're from that area, a lot of you are. I grew up not far from there. It's pretty desolate, pretty dry, and at this particular point in time in history, it was pretty well owned by the Comanche and the Kiowa, as old Gus says, and it's a pretty significant spot back in the day. Now it's just pretty well commemorated by, there's a plot of about 5 acres that was deeded to the Panhandle Historical Society. And there's a plaque and like a marble kind of headstone. There's a couple graves and just a plaque that commemorates it. And that's about all that's left there. But it's as you can see if you're watching, and the title here is it's a camp not meant to be, and for many different reasons, but the main reason being various Indian tribes. Most of them having to deal with the Comanche and the Kiowa. Well, back in the 1840s, I believe it was 1848 through 1849. Ceran St, Vrain and William Bent, who were the owners of the St. Vrain Trading Company and Bent's Fort there outside of Llano, the main, pretty well the only trading outpost on the Santa Fe Trail between St. Louis and Santa Fe. I'm sure there were a few others, but that was the main one. And they're very industrious guys, very capitalistic, and And for the most part, they really try to keep peace with the various Indian tribes throughout there. Once you got up towards Llano and Bent's Fort, those were Cheyenne and Arapahoe, and then the further south you got more into the Kiowa and Comanche. All of them very warlike, but William Bent, Ceran St, Vrain, they both married into various Indian tribes. And then they were good friends with Kit Carson, which never hurt anything. Kit Carson was just one of the ultimate badasses of the Old West. I'm going to do a deep dive onto the life of Kit Carson one of these days. I got to finish up my Mormon deep dive first. But they set up a little place north of Borger, Texas. And they called it Fort Adobe. They first they set up, just a log fort, and eventually they replaced it with a stronger, more reinforced adobe settlement. And they attempted to set up trade with the Comanche and the Kiowa. Comanche didn't have much of it, and they constantly attacked this fort, just always under attack. And then they tried later on to reestablish trade, and then it seemed like the Comanches were open to the idea. But then some Apaches had moved into the area, and they were causing some shit. And eventually, I think it was 1849, they went ahead and said, screw it, I don't want any more trouble. We're losing our ass on this deal, and they just blew it up, leaving nothing but a bunch of adobe bricks and blocks laying around. And that's how it got the name Adobe Walls. Well, 1864 rolls around. Kit Carson, I've covered him, fairly extensively throughout the course of this podcast. And he was, he was a guide and tracker scout for John C. Fremont. And he was very good at his job. He had married some Indian women, and he'd also killed many Indians too. But he was just, by all accounts, he was just about as straight shooter as they get. And he didn't kill any Indians that didn't need killing. He didn't kill any whites that didn't need killing. And but that being said, he kind of had a soft spot for the Indians, but he was not afraid to throw down. And he usually just about always came out ahead. And even when he lost, as we'll find out here shortly, he made him feel it. Even if he got his ass kicked, he made sure that they knew who they were up against. So 1864, Kit Carson's kind of tired of the bureaucracy with the military and the army and the government in general. He takes a post with the 1st New Mexico Volunteers, and the Comanche are kind of on the warpath. The western U.S. is pretty well just kind of left be as the Civil War is raging, and I don't know how many soldiers between the Union Army and the Confederate Army, but the 600,000 men killed. So you're looking at millions of troops fighting back in the eastern part of the U.S., leaving the western part to be pretty well run roughshod. The Indians grew in strength. The bandits coming up out of Mexico were raising hell. The Mormons were doing their thing over in Utah, trying to create their own little theocracy. And the Comanche in particular were just, they were just having a heyday on the Santa Fe Trail. And so they sent Kit Carson with 300 men to go out into the Llano Estacado, which at the time had not really ever been penetrated by the white man. Even the Texas Rangers, who followed the Comanche just about anywhere and everywhere, they didn't really venture out into the Llano because there was no water, or very little water. And the only people that really knew where the water was were the Indian tribes, particularly the Comanche. And so they're just raping and pillaging all along the Santa Fe Trail. And of course, government can't have that, so they send old Kit to find and kill, with extreme prejudice, they said, any and all Indian tribes that he may encounter. So they set off into the Llano, and they play it safe. They follow along the Canadian River. And Canadian River is kind of it's a pretty cool deal, just right there north of Amarillo. The Panhandle, it's just the high plains, flat. Watch your dog run away for 5 days. And then all of a sudden you drop down in the Canadian, a lot of red dirt, and it's, for that part of the world, pretty big river. I mean, if you live out west or a little further back east, where there's some, bigger type rivers, it's more of a stream, but for that part of the world, it's a pretty good sized river. Life's sure cheap up here on the Canadian. So they're following along the Canadian River, and they come upon a little village, I suppose, camp village of Kiowas, and they go ahead and attack it, and they pretty well overrun that camp. They don't suffer any casualties, and they keep moving forward, and the men, they're kind of high on themselves. Kit Carson knows what's up. He knows they're going to be in for a fight, and they come upon a pretty big Comanche village, about 1,000 warriors strong. So you include the women and children, you're probably looking at 2,000, maybe 2,500 people all told. But 1,000 warriors, which is a huge band of Indians. Any Indian tribe, and of course it's kind of a coalition of Kiowa, Arapahoe, and Cheyenne, kind of a recurring theme throughout this whole story. And they had one element of surprise, and really, if you will, they had the big guns in their back pocket. They had a pair of howitzer cannons, and this was really the difference maker for the first battle of Adobe Walls. So November 25th is when this happened. They rout this Kiowa camp, and then they come upon this big Comanche village, and they go ahead and set up their howitzers. The Indians, of course, see them coming. They're a little bit surprised because, like I said, the white men hadn't made it that far into the Llano before, and but they got 1,000 braves there, warriors, braves. I don't know what the correct terminology is anymore, but 1,000 fighting men, and pretty soon they group up and they mount an attack. They charge headlong right into the center of the line of Kit Carson and his men, and they just unleash hell with these howitzers. And the way these cannon worked, he fired one shot, but that basically sprayed a whole bunch of 69 caliber cannonball into, and so it was like just a giant sawed-off shotgun is kind of what people from the time called it. The Indians called it the Comanche in particular. They called it the gun that fired twice, and in typical Indian raider fashion, they just bunched up with their horses and they charged headlong right into it, and those howitzers just wreaked havoc, just blew holes all the way through it. And I don't know if you've ever been around injured horses before, but I mean they're noisier than pigs almost. I mean they just screech and squall and holler, and and it was a pretty gruesome sight. These big cannon round that then disperses into smaller cannon rounds, just tearing chunks of flesh and bone, and it just really does some damage, and it really spooks those Comanche pretty good, because they hadn't really they'd been around guns and whatnot, and probably been around some cannon, but nothing like that. So they regroup out of range, and they mount another attack. And this time they spread out a little bit, And they're still firing those howitzers, and they're still doing damage, but nowhere near the damage they did on that first charge. And those Indians, particularly the Comanche, they're known to be great warriors, excellent horsemen, and so they minimize their casualties, but they just keep coming. And Kit Carson and the boys, they're able to hold them at bay time after time after time, but eventually they're running short on cannon shot. They're basically under siege. They're kind of sitting up on this bluff, overlooking, and they're I don't know how far from the original Fort Adobe or Adobe Walls they were, but it was right in that area, just north of border. And eventually they just, they keep repelling these attacks, but there's more and more reinforcements coming in, and this is, well before Custer's last stand at Little Bighorn, but it's shaping up to be the same type of deal. However, Kit Carson's a whole different type of person than George Armstrong Custer. He has no sense of vanity whatsoever. He's a very practical, stoic, pragmatic type of guy. And when his scouts said, hey, you need to get the hell out of here or we're all going to die, he said, yeah, I think you're right. And they fall back under the cover of darkness. The Indians, they're no stranger to fighting in the dark. So to flush them out, try to flush them out in the open, they set some fires and try to burn them out. Well, Kit Carson knows these strategies. He's fought many, many times with the Indians, and they set their own back burns and pretty well stops that whole plan in their tracks, and they're able to get back to safety. They had left a supply train with ammunition, food, and water. A little ways off, knowing that they're probably going to meet up with a pretty big band of Indians, and knowing that it's going to be tough fighting. Like I said, Kit Carson is, he is just frontier man extraordinaire. He sees all this in advance. He leaves the supply train out of reach in relative safety, and so they link back up. They're able to regroup, resupply, get stocked back up, reloaded, and they make it out of there. And when they get back to, I don't know, I imagine they went back to Bent's Fort. And they're, if you're in the military or were in the military and saw combat, there's always an after action report. And that was the same back in those days as well. And Kit Carson himself said that, without those howitzers, and this is a direct quote from primary sources, says that, few would have been left to tell the tale. And they asked him what he thought of the victory. He said, well, the Indians whooped me in this fight. And he was right, but it was a pretty big blow to the Comanche and the Kiowa. They lost somewhere around 60 different warriors, while Kit Carson had 15 wounded and 3 dead. So they made it out of there. They inflicted some pretty heavy casualties. It was kind of it was one of those like guerrilla warfare type battles where both sides can really claim victory, but nobody really won that. And in the long course of history, you kind of got to chalk that one up to the white man, because they did more damage. They took very few casualties, and they showed the Comanche that they got some big boom, and and it really, like I said, it wreaked havoc on them. Those howitzers just did a number. And had they had more ammunition, they probably could have overrun, with being outnumbered 10-1. They might have actually won that and retook Adobe Walls. But that was the first battle of Adobe Walls, and it was the last military engagement that Kit Carson was a part of. And it goes to show just how competent and just what a leader that guy was, and just how much of a badass he really was. I mean, that you're talking 3,000 Comanche and Kiowa, which is even today, going back through history, I mean, you just didn't see that number of Indians. And when you did, I mean, look at Little Bighorn. Custer went down, and he went down hard. And if it hadn't been for a guy like Kit Carson, that's surely what was going to happen there. But always resourceful, always able and competent, and a pretty brilliant tactician, and a guy that just knew the way of the Indians. I mean, hell, he married one, and he was able to get him out of there without suffering hardly any casualties, inflicting a whole bunch of damage, and living to fight another day, even though he never actually fought another battle himself. But it didn't wipe out 300 of New Mexico's finest. And New Mexico at the time was a big territory. Covered New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming. I think parts, probably Montana as well. This is all 1864. So it's a big piece of country, and these were all volunteer soldiers, led by one of the best, and they got out of there with very minimal losses. Well, after that, pretty well left the Llano alone. They, the Civil War comes to an end, and the Texas Rangers were disbanded in Reconstruction, replaced by the Texas State Police, or I believe that's what they were called. And the trade route still there on the Santa Fe Trail, still open. Bent's Fort eventually kind of goes into disrepair, and William Bent gets massacred in New Mexico during I believe it was the Pueblo Indian uprising, and it's just just a wild, lawless, just rough country. But in the meantime, there's a huge influx of buffalo hunters, and they're just, and not even slowly, but just systematically, efficiently, just decimating the northern buffalo herds on the northern plains there, and pretty soon they set their sights on Texas, where there's still Texas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Kansas. There's still huge herds of buffalo there on the southern plains. And fast forward to 10 years later, 1874, and there's a group of traders out of Dodge City. And they're making plans, they're scheming and wheeling and dealing. They talk with the military, and Army decides they're pretty well just gonna, even though they're trying to keep peace with the Indians, and they're, this large-scale buffalo hunt was not just sanctioned but encouraged by the military, because that's the main food supply for all the Plains Indians. And you cut off their food supply, the weaker they become, and the easier they are to defeat. And it's working really well on the northern plains, so they decide, well, even though we've got these treaties and whatnot, and we're kind of taking a hands-off approach to the southern plains Indians, particularly the Comanche, because the Comanche are just, even at this point, they're still kind of running roughshod. I guess, the late 1860s there. The Indian Wars pick up, and this 1874-75, which was known as the Red River War, and that's when they really set their sights on the Comanche. And they tell this party of hunters and I guess merchants, go ahead, do your thing. So they set forth for Texas out of Dodge City. It's about a 150-mile trip down to where they're at. And they set up a settlement about a mile from the original Adobe Walls of Fort Adobe. And they set up 2 stores. One store is owned by Charles Rath and Company. Charles Rath himself and his buddy James Hanrahan, they open a saloon. It's just kind of a sod dugout saloon. There's another store, a set of corrals, a restaurant, and then there's a blacksmith shop owned by a man named Tom O'Keefe. And pretty soon, despite all the Indian trouble, there's plenty of buffalo to be had, and before you know it, there's about 200 to 300 buffalo hunters just roaming throughout the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle, doing their thing. And you got to remember, and I always use Lonesome Dove as kind of a guidepost because everybody's read it, everybody's watched it, and it was a pretty accurate depiction of some of the characters that you would come across in the Old West. And the buffalo hunters, and in particular the buffalo skinners, were not a very well regarded group of people. I mean, you had some big names and some well respected people like Buffalo Bill Cody, Bat Masterson, who was sheriff of Dodge City or marshal. I can't remember exactly which office he held in Dodge City, but famous Dodge City lawman, gunfighter. Less well known as a journalist. He was a big time boxing, covered the sport of boxing, and was a well known journalist back in those days. But he made his start. He's actually a Canadian, and not only a Canadian, he's from Quebec. Get that reference? You're welcome. Hats off to you. But yeah, he was a Canadian by birth, but he got his start in America as a buffalo hunter, and he made up part of this band that was hanging out there at Adobe Walls when the second battle happened.
Hey, you with the face. Yeah. We got beef? You should have beef. Stetson Ranch beef. It's what you should be putting in your mouth. Stetson Ranches out of Fromberg, Montana. They're the lead sponsor of my podcast here. Some of the best people I've ever met on earth. They're fourth or fifth generation ranch family there in Fromberg, Montana. They do everything right when it comes to their ranch. They've got some of the best quality quarter horses you can find out there. And the horse market is a little crazy right now, but Tina has got a band of brood mares with some just phenomenal bloodlines, going back to foundation quarter horses like Zanpar Bar, Two-Eye Jack, Peppy Sandbadger, Doc Bar. They just picked up a new stud that goes back to Doc Bar, and he's an own son of Peppy Sandbadger. They also got a King Ranch stud with a full crop expected this spring. Those colts are going to be just big, shapy, athletic, cowy, great disposition, gentle demeanor, and level head on them. Ready to go any which way you want. They're going to have plenty of bone, have plenty of body, just the right type of quarter horses that you might want. They also offer a really unique direct-to-consumer beef program, pasture to plate, if you will. They're running registered Black Angus cows, registered Hereford bulls, and they're feeding them out themselves using the highest quality ingredients, the best care you could possibly want from a rancher to their cattle. It's going to be delivered to your doorstep on dry ice. $6.95 a pound if you buy a quarter or an eighth. But the really cool thing is they got this subscription plan, and it's $125 a month, and it's 8 to 11 pounds of beef. That's hamburger, roast, stew meat, and various cuts of steak. If you use my promo code, Move Your Ass, MOVEYERASS, all one word, use that promo code, you'll get 20% off your first month. It's a hell of a deal and a hell of a family. Check them out online, StetsonRanches.com if you'd like to see the horses, StetsonBeef.com to order some meat. Next up, we got Thunderbird Equine, Miss Jessica Pancost out of Sandia Park, New Mexico. Now, she was up in northern Colorado, so you might know her from up there if you're in that area. She's now down around the Albuquerque area. She is a third-generation rancher, second-generation horse trainer. She's focusing on vaquero-style horsemanship for your colt, your horse, and your mule. Yeah, you heard that right. She deals with mules. She requires a 60-day minimum on all animals you bring to her. But if you're bringing a colt to start, you can expect a gentler, quiet, confident, and respectful colt with all the tools to move on to any discipline that you might want them to. They're going to, on the ones you bring in to finish or for a tune-up, they're going to get all sorts of roping experience, ranch experience. The one on the roping side, they're going to be head and heeling, breakaway, and ranch roping, any and all of the above. And you can expect them to develop a harder stop, a more collected frame, and be able to move off of precise movement through your leg cues. And they will develop confidence to do anything you'd like under saddle, whether that be mounted shooting, roping, trail riding, or cattle work. And at the end of the program, you're going to get 5 free lessons to reacquaint yourself with your brand new equine partner. And you can find her on Facebook and Instagram, Thunderbird Equine. Give her a holler, 720-205-2996, and make sure you let her know you heard about it on Burnin' Daylight and that I sent you her way. Next up, we got Tracie Morrison, Custom Silver out of Chelsea, Oklahoma. Tracie's a friend of the show, longtime listener, and just an all-around good guy. He's building all sorts of cool cowboy shit, whether that be buckles, bits, or spurs, conchos, cinch rings, legging rings, whatever you want. It's all handmade, custom made to order, and he'll just make some stuff and keep it laying around if you'd like to pick it up too. So just a great guy, makes some really cool stuff. His engraving is really top notch, and hell of a good guy. You can find him on Instagram. Just search him up, Tracie Morrison Custom Silver. And yeah, he'll build you something. Let him know I sent you, and he'll cut you a little deal. And make sure you go tell him. Just go check out his stuff. We just did give away a horn cap and a silver money clip that he made. Really, really neat stuff. So go check that out. And last but not least, we got 4T Ag Insurance. Mr. Colt Tritt is the owner-operator of that outfit. They provide all sorts of ranch insurance, whether it be pasture, rangeland, and forage for drought, annual forage insurance, equine, animal mortality, livestock risk protection, dairy revenue protection for milk and cattle, pasture and fire insurance, pasture fire insurance, and that's just to name a few. There's a whole lot more services they can offer. You have to give him a holler. He's a good guy, great friend of the show, and really works hard to provide good risk management and insurance for your operation. You can give him a holler at 817-559-5770. Or you can find them on Facebook and Instagram, 4T Land and Cattle, 4T Ag Insurance. Just give them a search. You can find them, and let them know you heard about it on Burnin' Daylight. And if you don't like listening to the ads, I understand. Nobody does. But they're good folks. They're paying me to put the word out there for them, and I'm glad to do so. But if that's not your cup of tea, there's a way you can get around that. You head over to patreon.com/burninDaylight, and you can subscribe there. You get ad-free content. You'll get bonus content, and you'll also get signed up to enter a drawing that we do every month. Month of July, we gave away a horn cap and a money clip from Tracie Morrison. I already told you about that. Matt Wilson will be building a cantle concho. For August. We might have a few other things to give away. Haven't decided yet, but anyhow, it's a good deal. We do some group discussions. And you get a bunch of other cool stuff that you don't get on the regular feed. So patreon.com/burninDaylight and sign up there. Thanks to all the sponsors. Let's get back into the show. Well, as the Army and the buffalo hunter are taking their toll on the Comanche Nation and the Kiowa people and the Arapahoe, once again, these tribes, the Kiowa and the Comanche were known allies, but the Arapahoe were kind of mortal enemies of the Comanche. But
desperate times calls for desperate measures, and they band together and they hold a rain or a sun dance, which is and I'm not super familiar with it. I did some research on it, and it sounds like, I mean, it was a big deal for these folks. It was usually held in the spring, and it was according to the tradition as I read it, and don't quote me on this because I don't really know, but it was meant to promote healing for the people, and the idea behind it was personal sacrifice. And so a lot of times how it was set up is they would plant this big pole in the ground, and they would attach these warriors, these braves, to that pole with strips of rawhide, big long strips of rawhide. And a lot of times they would pierce their skin, and that's how they were held to the pole. And they would just dance for days on end. And like you had the entire village set up a little ways away from the sun dance itself, just providing support and prayers and whatever. But I mean, this would go on for days, regardless of what the weather was. And I mean, these warriors and braves would just beat themselves down to nothing. But that was the whole point of it. It was just a sacrifice to show that you were giving up something personal for the good of the tribe in order to help promote healing and build back strength for the people themselves. Well, during this particular Sundance in the spring of 1874, there's a Comanche medicine man named Isatai. It's ISA-TAI. Isatai. And he was a well-respected medicine man, one of the right-hand men, and depends on who you talk to. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have read that book, Empire of the Summer Moon, by S.C. Gwynn. I know Rogan has talked about him extensively. If you listen to my podcast with Daniele Bolelli, particularly if you're listening on Patreon, he talks about how a lot of that book is bullshit. So I don't know what to believe there, but so there's a lot of different accounts that Quanah Parker, who was he was the last great Comanche war chief, half white. There's some accounts that say that Isatai was kind of his right hand man, or was Isatai was his mentor. But then there's also accounts that say, like, in this particular Sundance, like, Quanah was not on the same page with Isatai. But all that being said, I don't know exactly what happened, but those were the two main leaders of this particular party, and they summoned about 700, give or take. Once when you're dealing with this type of stuff, it's hard, especially with the Indian tribes, because they don't really have much of a written record, so it's all folklore and stories passed down from generations. So the numbers I've found range anywhere from 300 to 1,000 strong in this war party. But the two main men were Quanah Parker and Isatai. And Isatai had a vision during this Sundance, and he told of a great victory that was to come. And in particular, he said the white man's bullets would not do you any harm. And also that they would have the surprise of darkness, because they were going to attack at night. So they're feeling bloody as going back to Lonesome Dove. It's if you're going to have a good kind of placeholder to demonstrate stuff, I think Lonesome Dove's about as good as it gets as a landmark, or a starting point, or whatever. A reference point is what I'm looking for. I think, like I said, I think Lonesome Dove's about as good as it gets. Larry McMurtry did a fine job, with some of the historical details there. And on the night of June 27th, as I said, these are buffalo hunters. They're merchants, kind of cutthroat businessmen. But there's also some pretty big names there. Like I said, Bat Masterson was hanging out there at Adobe Walls, as well as a fella named Billy Dixon, who will later become known as one of the greatest marksmen in the Old West. But they were all there trying to make their fortune, and these were not your typical people. They're kind of gross. They're out there hunting buffalo. And the hunters themselves, maybe not so much, because they typically would pay, a team of guys to go out and skin all these buffalo that they had killed, and they were shooting dozens per day. They're just huge herds of buffalo, and the buffalo would run if you spooked them, but if you'd sit out with your big Sharps rifle and just pick them off, they didn't really move much, and they made it really easy to hunt. So they'd shoot a buffalo, drop him onto the next one, and when they figured out they'd killed all they wanted to, or the buffalo would finally spook and move on, well then in would come the skinners, and these guys were just absolutely fucking disgusting. I mean, you're talking about 1,500 pound buffalo. I would imagine about 1,500 pounds. And then they'd come in, you'd have to skin all that. And they would take the hump and the tongue and the liver, sometimes the heart, but they would take very little meat off of these buffalo, mostly just the hide, because that was what they were all there for. That was how these hunters made their money. And they would skin out these buffalo, and they'd be covered in just tallow and blood and fly shit, and just disgusting people. But that's how it was back then. But they were also very hard drinking, so they'd come into Adobe Walls. There was a saloon, there's a restaurant, store they'd resupply, and then they'd get just all sorts of loosey-goosey there at the sod saloon. Burn it down, wake up hungover as hell, and get on their wagon with a load of skins headed back to Dodge City or to Bent's Fort, wherever the case may be. But it was a little closer to Dodge City, so that's typically where they headed. And at the time, there was 28 people in the settlement of Adobe Walls. The merchants there, so Hanrahan and Charles Rath, Bat Masterson, Billy Dixon, and a few others. There was one woman, I forget who she was married to, but wife of one of the people there. And they're all asleep, passed out, most likely from just boozing all day. And but they get woke up in the middle of the night because one of the ridge poles in the saloon, where a lot of them were sleeping, like I said, it was an old sod hut basically with a bar, and they'd dig out into to the side of a hill, dig out a little settlement, and they'd reinforce it with lodge poles or ridge poles. And one of those poles broke in the middle of the night, and it sounded like a rifle shot, and it was enough to wake everybody up. And the owner supposedly kind of knew, I think it was Hanrahan, kind of knew that this attack was coming. They'd heard word about this Sundance, and they kind of expected it. But all that being said, they get to work repairing this ridge pole, and they get it fixed, and just about everybody goes back to bed because they're probably still drunk. And I don't know if you'll see that in any of the accounts in the history books, but knowing what I know about the people that partook in the buffalo trade, Yeah, they were probably drunk, sleeping it off. But Billy Dixon, the sharpshooter, he had planned to go to Dodge City in the morning with a load of skins, and so he was already up. It was probably 2, 3 in the morning by the time, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning by the time they got it all fixed. Everyone went back to bed, but he's like, well, I might as well just stay up. I'm leaving in the morning anyhow. So he gets to work preparing his wagon and getting ready to head out. But unfortunately for the band of Indians, he sees them coming. And so he sounds the alarm, and they, before you know it, here they come. And Billy Dixon was quoted. He said, quote, "There was never a more splendidly barbaric sight. In the years after, I was glad that I had seen it. Hundreds of warriors, the flower of fighting men of the southwestern plains tribes, mounted upon their finest horses, armed with guns and lances, and carrying heavy shields of thick buffalo hide, were coming like the wind. Over all was splashed the rich colors of red, vermilion, and ochre, on the bodies of men, on the bodies of the running horses. Scalps dangled from the bridles, gorgeous war bonnets fluttered their plumes, bright feathers dangled from the tails and manes of the horses, and the bronze, half-naked bodies of the riders glittered with the ornaments of silver and brass. Behind this headlong charging host stretched the plains, on whose horizon the rising sun was lifting its morning fires. The warriors seemed to emerge from this glowing background." And that's a direct quote from Mr. Billy Dixon. And about 700 head come screaming down on them. And there's 28 in total, 27 men and one woman. They're holed up in Adobe Walls. So Billy Dixon sounds the alarm. They all hit the rampart or whatever, the little skirmish line at the front, and they shoot their rifles at him, whatever they had loaded, and then they fall back into the safety of the sod saloon and the 2 different stores. The blacksmith shop, it's being the blacksmith, and it's out on the plains, hotter than shit. So it's probably open air, not going to provide much cover, maybe an anvil, but that's probably about it you're going to have for cover there in the blacksmith shop. So they all hole up in the stores and the saloon, and they're way better armed than these Indians are, but most of their weapons are long-range buffalo guns, Sharp's rifles, and before you know it, the Indians are right there in the middle of the settlement, and those big buffalo guns are absolutely no use to them. And in this initial attack, they are just about overrun. It was brutal close quarters combat. They were close enough. They were banging on the doors and the windows with the rifles that climbed up on the top of the buildings, and they were shooting down on them from the top. But all in all, it scared them more than anything. Didn't inflict too many casualties, but they did have a few dead, 4 in total. There was 2 brothers named Shadler that were probably passed out drunk in their wagon when the alarm was sounded, and they never made it. A fella named Billy Tyler, he was up on the rampart, and what is it they actually called that? The stockade. So stockade would have been like the perimeter fence. So think of all those old West forts with the sharpened lodge poles. They kind of had that out front. Well, he fired his couple of shots, and he's trying to get back to the store for safety, and he gets shot through both lungs, kills him dead. And then later on, after the initial attack, after, I don't know, I think they said like 45 minutes to an hour of constant, just close quarters fighting, they're reduced to using Winchesters and pistols to fight them off, but they eventually repel this attack, and the Comanches and the Kiowa, they retreat out a distance of the of the long guns, and they just set up siege, which is not a normal tactic for really any Indian tribe. It was more of a move of desperation, because these Indians are probably pretty hungry, but they just had their big sun dance, and they're really feeling, their medicine man predicted a huge victory, and they're feeling pretty good. But after you get beat back with by a far inferior force, 28 people. So they're at the minimum, they're outnumbered 10-1. It just depends on which account you go with. If you're looking at 1,000 guys, you're looking at 30-1 odds. 1,000 Comanche and Kiowa warriors against 28 buffalo hunters or 27 buffalo hunters and a woman. And then I don't mean to talk bad on the women. I don't know how how salty they were, or the one was. It doesn't really say, but they repel this attack, and shit starts to go south for the war party. They get back to out of range, and they're like, "Hey, man, this Isatai guy is kind of full of shit. We're not supposed to get hurt by the white man's bullets, and we just took a whole bunch of casualties there. Like, what the hell, man?" But it's not all peaches and cream, sunshine and fucking rainbows for the guys back in the walls. There was a fella by the name of William Olds. He's climbing down a ladder in Rath's store and accidentally shoots himself in the head, and he ends up dying too. But here they go. They're laying siege. They keep attacking, but they gotta come from a ways off, and it's the high plains. They try sneaking through the high grass, and not much accomplished. They keep taking casualties. They end up injuring Quanah Parker, who's pretty well the main guy of this whole party. And that's one thing about the Indians. You take out their leader, and boy, the rest of them kind of wilt pretty quickly after that. And most of the party turns on this medicine man, Isatai, and it's just not looking good. And the final blow that just really broke their spirit. There's a party of, I don't know how many, but say 10 or 12 of the highest level braves. They take a position on this little bluff overlooking Adobe Walls, and it's easily 3/4 of a mile out there, and apparently the wind was just right, and old Billy Dixon, they're still hunkered down, and they're able to get outside the stores from time to time, and they drag off the dead horses so it just the smell doesn't overtake them, and they're able to gather up the wounded. I don't know when they buried the dead, but probably right in there about that time. Well, one of these little forays outside the store, Billy Dixon sets up on a little outcropping of rocks, and they can see this war party out there about 3/4 of a mile to a mile. And Billy decides, well, what the hell? Wind looks good, feels good. And he gets the old Sharp's Big 50, and they say it was anywhere from a 50-70 to a 51-10 bullet that they used, but they didn't really classify the ammunition like that. So it was they did a 50 caliber, and then their other measurement was by how big the shell was. So this one was a 52.5. It's a 2.5 inch round with 50 caliber slug. They said that was most efficiently, like the 50-70 and the 50-90 were most effective at like 100 yards. It was a big, heavy round, and like the smaller the round you got, the more you could reach out there. So he was probably shooting a 51-10, but they called it the Big 50. And he takes his aim, shoots his shot, and what do you know? 1,538 yards out there, he drops a Comanche brave right off his horse, and at that point, the rest of the war party says, "Fuck all of that, I'm out. Screw you guys, I'm going home." And that was kind of the end of the battle, and it was one of the last major battles of the Comanche Wars. Shortly after that, between Quanah Parker being out of commission, and then just their whole food supply just being devastated, it was pretty, I won't say easy, but it was a lot more manageable to round up all these various bands of Comanche and Kiowa and push them onto a reservation there in Oklahoma. And Billy Dixon, apparently he was a pretty straight shooter, kind of in the same cut from the same cloth as Kit Carson. He became a war hero after that, and eventually ended up joining the Army as a scout. And he was asked about that shot probably 1 million times throughout the rest of his life, but he said, "Man, it was about as lucky as it gets." And you're looking at it's kind of, and I really wish I could have talked to Larry McMurtry before he died, but I wonder if that scene where Gus shoots one of the buffalo hunters in the gut with the Winchester, I wonder if he kind of took that scene and built it off of this shot from Billy Dixon, where it just damn near impossible shot. Nowadays people hit 1,500 yard shots almost in his sleep, but the technology has advanced so much that you got far better ballistics with your rifle. You got the optics the optics we have now it might as well be magic compared to what they had in 1874. You're probably looking at like a 2-power scope, which you can't adjust. You're just and God knows how they zeroed that. It's a truly incredible shot, but also equally just blind luck. But that was it for the Comanche. Man, if we can't even sit out here a mile away and not get shot, there's no way we're gonna. This Issatai guy is full of shit. And so they eventually pulled back. Reinforcements reached them, and they basically evacuated the whole place. And like 6 days later, the war party came back through, burnt it to the ground, and Adobe Walls was never more. And as I've covered in this whole tale here, probably was never meant to be in the first place. The Llano Estacado eventually was settled. Now you got towns like Hereford and Dalhart, Dumas, Stinnett, Groover, Happy, just Stratford, all those little towns, even in the Oklahoma Panhandle, Goodwill, Beaver, Guyman, all those towns eventually popped up after they cleared out the Comanche and pushed them onto a reservation. But Adobe Walls was never more. It's, as I said, now it's just a 5-acre plot with 3 graves and a couple plaques that commemorate it. And it's kind of one of those stories of folklore. If you grew up in that part of the world, everybody knows Adobe Walls. Not many people really know where it's at, but they know it's kind of a source of pride. Just like, yeah, Adobe Walls happened just not too far from here. And just, you hear the Llano Estacado, especially when they're talking about it on Lonesome Dove, and you're just like, yeah, drove through there many a time. And you look out there, and it's hard to imagine what it had to have been like. And you had one of the greatest Old West frontierman that ever lived, probably arguably the greatest one in Kit Carson. And even though he made it out of there and inflicted some pretty heavy casualties on the tribe that band of Comanche and Kiowa and Arapahoe that they attacked, they really didn't come out of it all that far ahead. They didn't lose too many people, but they spent a ton of ammo, spent a ton of time, and really had nothing to show for it. And here they go 10 years later. They make a go of it for a little short time, but it'd be cool to talk to some of those people from back in the day. And I guarantee you, they'd tell you that those Comanche don't fuck around. And boy, they really didn't. And if it hadn't have been just kind of from blind luck of that ridgepole breaking in the middle of the night, chances are that place would have been overrun. Everybody would have been scalped, mutilated, tortured. And I don't say that lightly just to, I guess, throw shade at the Indians, but that's how they were. It was kind of standard practice. You leave one bullet for yourself if you're getting attacked by a band of Plains Indians, because that was part of their culture. They took prisoners, but they didn't treat them well. They either turned them into slaves or they tortured the shit out of them, and just gruesome. There's hundreds of accounts of people riding up on the tack of a massacre, and you'd see a guy scalped, guts laid open, and his nuts cut off and stuffed in his mouth, eyes cut out. And then all this, there was all meaning behind it, and I'm not going to get too far into it because I'm pretty ignorant on the actual customs and the reasons why. But a lot of it had to do with the victim not being able to cross over into the afterlife, and they'd cut their eyes out, so they wandered the earth and the afterlife blind. But it was brutal. So, and everybody knew that you didn't allow yourself to be taken alive at all costs. You saved one bullet for yourself if you could, and because that bullet to the head was going to be a lot more generous than what the Comanche or the Kiowa were going to do to you. And it's one of those things that, man, it's just like, why even keep trying? But money was there. The Buffalo market was booming, and they paid a little bit of a price. They're at the end of the day, you can't really chalk it all up to anything else but a loss for them. But it led to the downfall of the Comanche and eventually the settling of the Panhandle region, the Llano itself, and that was something at the time a lot of people didn't think ever would have got done, and a lot of it was due to this second battle of Adobe Walls. And so anyway, I hope you enjoyed that story. I always thought that was I've heard about it many a time throughout my life, but this is the first time I really looked into it, and I'm sure there's plenty of details that I left out that I haven't read yet, but it'd be another one that I'm gonna look into more, just because it's an interesting story. There's plenty of those type of deals throughout the Old West. And, well, we'll do some more of them. So anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. Make sure you go do all the subscribe, follow bullshit, and make sure you sign up for Patreon. You get cool stuff over there. And patreon.com/Burnin Daylight. It does help me out a bunch, and get to give away some cool stuff because of that. And it's a good way for you guys to support me if you like what I'm doing. Send a few bucks my way, and I promise you it'll be squandered needlessly. So anyways, on that note, Thanks for tuning in, and move your ass. We're burning daylight.
The battle was over at Custer's last stand, and taps were sounding for all the brave men, while one lone survivor, wounded and weak, Comanche, the brave horse, lay at the general's feet. Comanche, you fought hard. Comanche, you tried. You were a good soldier, so hold your head up high. For even the greatest sometimes must fall. Comanche, the brave horse, you gave your all. Though you are silent, your deeds did speak loud. If your buddies could see you, I know they'd be proud. The symbol of bravery at the Little Bighorn. Poor old Comanche, your battle scarred and torn. Comanche, you fought hard. Comanche, you tried. You were a good soldier, so hold your head up high. For even the greatest sometimes must fall. Comanche, the brave horse, you give your all. Comanche, you fought hard. Comanche, you tried. You were a good soldier, so hold your head up high. For